A boy vanished during a simple game of hide-and-seek at the airport. No one saw him leave, no cameras caught it. Panic spread until a canine named Alaska picked up a scent no one else could. He led officers to a sealed door, hidden behind a wall with no record on any airport map. What lay beyond would uncover a trafficking ring hidden in plain sight. Before we dive into this gripping true story, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who believes that not all heroes walk on two legs. The terminal buzzed with the usual chorus of rolling suitcases, intercom announcements, and overlapping conversations. It was a typical Tuesday afternoon at Westgate International, and among the crowd, the Flores family stood out, not because of how they looked, but because of what they radiated. Movement, life, energy. 8-year-old Leo darted between the rows of metal seats, his dark eyes wide with excitement as he clutched a small rubber ball, bouncing it against a column before catching it mid-air. His older sister Anna, 12 and already carrying the weight of preteen patience, stood arms crossed next to their mother, who was checking them in at counter D3. "Leo, stay where I can see you," his mother called without looking up from her passport. "For 5 more minutes, please." "But he said we'd play hide-and-seek," Leo argued, pointing at an imaginary friend. Anna rolled her eyes. "That was 5 minutes ago. Grow up, Leo." Still, the boy smiled and backed away, slipping into the game he'd already committed to in his head. He counted under his breath as he disappeared behind a nearby vending machine. 3, 2, 1, ready or not, here I come. Then he giggled and vanished from sight. Anna noticed first. "Where's Leo?" she asked a minute later, scanning left and right. Her tone wasn't panicked at first. It was the kind of annoyed concern siblings often carried. "Leo, seriously, it's not funny." But after 2 minutes, her voice sharpened. "Mom, I think he's gone." "What do you mean, gone?" their mother asked, her voice hollowing out even as she pushed away from the counter. "Leo." The crowd moved around them, oblivious. A family beside them argued about carry-on restrictions. A businessman tapped on his laptop. Time stretched thin as the seconds ticked past. The initial search was routine. 2 airport security personnel approached, professional but casual. "Children wander off all the time," one of them said. "They usually turn up at the cameras." But Leo didn't show up at the restrooms, or the food court, or anywhere at all. In another corner of the terminal, a black and tan German shepherd named Alaska walked dutifully beside his handler, Officer Rachel Dawes. Alaska, a seasoned canine with the TSA's explosive detection unit, had served through 3 administrations and could sniff out C4 buried under 6 inches of cement. Rachel sipped her lukewarm coffee and tossed the last bit into the nearest trash before adjusting Alaska's vest. The dog had been restless since they left the checkpoint. He walked with purpose, ears pricked forward. As they neared the main concourse, Alaska stopped. His muscles went rigid. "What is it?" Rachel asked. The shepherd didn't respond with tail wagging or whimpers. He growled low and hard and pulled toward a corner behind an out-of-service information kiosk. It looked like nothing, just a panel of wall half covered by an outdated tourism poster. "Alaska, heel," Rachel commanded. But the dog didn't budge. Instead, he began barking, short staccato bursts that echoed above the chatter. Passengers turned. So did security. One of the guards from the Flores case turned toward Rachel. "You okay over there?" Alaska began pawing at the base of the wall, his nails scratching against the metal like urgency itself. Rachel frowned. She wasn't new to this behavior. Alaska had only ever reacted like this twice, and both times he'd been right. "Something's off," she said quietly into her radio. "I need eyes on Concourse D, Panel 7B, behind Kiosk 4. Alaska's alerting. Back at the counter, Leo's mother's breathing came in. "He would never go far. He gets nervous in crowds. He clings to my coat in the grocery store." Anna's eyes, however, stayed locked on Alaska. "That's the dog we saw this morning," she murmured. Rachel turned as the backup arrived, 2 more canine officers in tow. One of them reached for a portable scanner, sweeping it over the panel. No explosives, no metal, nothing. But Alaska wouldn't stop barking. "You want this panel opened," Rachel said. "You can't just..." "I have probable cause." A call was made. Minutes later, a facility technician arrived, red toolbox in hand. With a reluctant twist and a crowbar, the false panel gave way. It wasn't a closet. It wasn't a wall. It was a door. Steel-plated, no handle on the outside, no markings, no digital lock, just a keyhole that hadn't been used in years. Rachel exchanged looks with the technician. "What is this?" He hesitated. "Old service access, I think. Should have been. It's not on the current floor plan," she finished. Alaska sat now silent but alert. His ears were forward, his tail motionless. The scent he followed had not vanished. "Open it." The man knelt, tried a master key. It turned with a reluctant click. The door creaked open into darkness. They aimed flashlights inside. What they saw was not what anyone expected. Rachel kept her flashlight aimed straight into the narrow void behind the panel. The beams slicing through dust motes suspended in stale air. The steel door stood recessed about 3 feet back, slightly tarnished, matte gray and unmarked. No signage, no access keypad, no emergency instructions. Just a keyhole and a welded hinge streaked with rust. The technician blinked in disbelief. "I've been working this terminal 6 years," he muttered. "I've never seen this thing on any blueprint, not even the maintenance maps." Rachel didn't respond. She knelt beside Alaska, who stood poised and silent, his nose twitching rapidly, his head low in detection posture. The scent trail hadn't ended, it intensified. "He's tracking something active," Rachel said. "Something recent." Behind them, Officer Daniels, a young transfer from Fort Worth, pulled up the internal access database on his tablet. No listing for a door at this location. Officially, this wall backs up to an electrical duct sealed post-renovation in 2007. But this clearly isn't part of that. Rachel nodded once, motioning for the technician. "Get it open." "The man, this could be a fire code issue. This is a missing child case. That door's coming off with or without your paperwork." Her tone was flat but authoritative, and Alaska gave a soft, urgent bark, breaking the moment like a cracked whip. That was all it took. The technician reluctantly inserted a second master key, this one designed for decommissioned service hatches. It clicked but barely turned. He grunted, bracing his shoulder against the frame. The door creaked, groaned, then gave way in a puff of stale air. Everyone stepped back instinctively. Alaska didn't. He surged forward, pulling against his leash, nose down. Rachel let him go. What lay beyond wasn't dramatic at first glance. A narrow passageway, metal-walled, lined with aging conduit and loose wiring. The air smelled of copper, mold, and something sharper like machine grease. The ceiling hung low, forcing the officers to duck as they stepped inside. Rachel held up a hand, halting the rest of the team. "Alaska leads," she ordered. No sudden moves. As they moved deeper, the lights from their flashlights shimmered across signs of long-term neglect. Spiderwebs coated junction boxes. Dust blanketed every exposed surface. But the floor was different. There were disturbances, irregular trails, as if someone had walked through recently. Multiple someones. Rachel crouched, brushing her fingers across a faint smear. "Fresh," she whispered. "Dust's been moved. This isn't just an old corridor. They're using it." Officer Daniels took photos, noting structural details. "We're moving parallel to the south baggage corridor," he said. "If this keeps going, it might intersect with the restricted goods loading dock." "That's not possible," said the technician behind them. "That entire subgrid was sealed during Phase 2 renovations. These walls weren't just blocked, they were welded shut. Someone reopened it, and they did it from the inside." She turned to Alaska, who had stopped at a junction split. Nose up against the left wall, breathing hard. His body was tense, his tail still. "Something's on the other side," Rachel murmured. Daniels pointed out the junction box mounted on the corner. "This shouldn't be powered," he said, scanning it with a voltmeter. "But I'm getting current flow." Rachel frowned. "Live wire in a dead zone, someone's been maintaining this." Alaska growled. Not aggressive, focused. His ears swiveled. He pawed once at the floor seam. "Door," Rachel said quietly. She traced the panel's edge with her gloved hand and found a pressure latch. Old, mechanical, no electronic. She glanced back. "Ready flash, no loud radios, let's see what we're really dealing with." The latch clicked open with a hiss, revealing another corridor. Broader this time, dimly by flickering fluorescence bolted into the ceiling. The hum of ventilation echoed faintly from deeper inside. Alaska entered first, nose down, then stopped. His body shifted into high alert, rigid, ears sharp, muscles coiled. Then Rachel saw it, a half-empty juice box, crushed, strawberry flavor. Next to it a small toy car, the kind that fits in a child's palm, both lying in the dust like broken breadcrumbs. She stared at the items for a second too long. Daniel stepped forward, scanning with his handheld tracker. "Ma'am, this isn't some forgotten utility crawlspace. There's infrastructure down here. HVAC, wiring, possibly even camera lines. This corridor is part of an old systems loop." "Then why isn't it on any schematic?" Rachel demanded. "Because someone wanted it forgotten," Daniel said. "Until now." Rachel picked up the toy car gently, then turned to Alaska. "You sure, boy?" Alaska let out a single bark. "Affirmative." They moved forward again, deeper. The corridor sloped downward subtly but persistently. Rachel felt it in her calves. Alaska pulled harder, no longer sniffing. He was following something more urgent now. Scent? Sound? It didn't matter. He knew the trail was hot. "We're under baggage security now," Daniels whispered, 2 levels below public access. "Is there access to elevators?" "Only for freight," he said. "And even then it's coded. No passengers." They turned a corner, and the hallway widened again. Another door. No window, but this one had a modern magnetic lock recently installed. Daniel stepped forward with a signal scanner. "This is new? Less than a year old. Definitely not part of the original terminal design." Rachel exhaled. "So someone reactivated the accessway. Retrofit, that means budget and access." She stepped closer to the lock. "So who would do that and why?" Alaska stood frozen at the base of the door, one paw raised. He didn't grow. He didn't bark. He waited. And when Rachel turned to ask for the ram bar, the entire hallway suddenly... Rachel didn't flinch when the hallway behind them sealed shut. The sound of the door locking, automatic, metallic, rippled down the corridor like a warning. Daniel spun around, checking his tablet, and swore under his breath. "Signal's out." "What do you mean, out?" Rachel asked, keeping her voice level. "Camera feeds," he muttered, swiping across the display. "Course D, South Corridor, Freight Loop, no data from any of those nodes. It's not just now. There's a blackout window on all records from earlier today, starting at 13:32 and ending at 13:39. Rachel narrowed her eyes. "Leo was reported missing at 13:36. Daniels nodded slowly. "Someone timed this perfectly. Diagrams Elias on the door ahead." Rachel tapped her comm, but only static crackled in response. "Dead zone?" "Faraday shielding," Daniels replied. "Not uncommon in these older industrial wings, but the shielding here looks intentional. Upgraded wiring, grounded casings, all too clean to be relics." Rachel stepped closer to the wall, running her fingers along a junction box. The dust around it had been disturbed, faint finger trails cutting through the grime. "So we're dealing with someone who knows how to manipulate infrastructure, someone who's had time to prepare." Daniels looked uneasy. "And someone with high-level access." Rachel turned to the technician who had stayed at the corridor's entrance, now nervously clutching his toolbox. "You said this area was sealed in 2007? He nodded. "That's what records say, but clearly it's not." She leaned in. "When was the last time anyone reported work done in this section?" The man hesitated. "I mean, technically, never. But we don't monitor these areas closely. They're considered decommissioned zones, so if someone had a master badge and didn't log entry..." He didn't finish. Rachel didn't need him to. They returned to the security hub via a maintenance shaft that led back toward a live junction room. Alaska moved with precision, constantly scanning, his body alert but silent. When they reached the control center, 2 uniformed supervisors met them at the door. One of them, Shift Lead Officer Grant, gestured them inside without a word. "We've pulled all camera feeds for Concourse D from the last 3 hours," Grant said. "There's a 7-minute window where everything goes static. Not a blackout, not a power loss, just fuzz. As if someone injected noise into the signal. It's clean. Too clean." He tapped a screen where 6 panels flickered, showing static from earlier that afternoon. "It starts precisely at 1:32 p.m. and ends at 1:39. Which means it wasn't a glitch. Someone did this on purpose, likely with inside access. And no motion alerts during that time. Nothing. Logs were wiped and replaced with filler data. Even backups on the secure server are overridden. Whoever did this knew our redundancies. Daniels approached the other desk where a junior technician sat pale and fidgeting. You said someone from facilities had flagged an anomaly last week? The young man hesitated, then clicked open a report on his desktop. It was minor, just a flagged timestamp in the corridor junction logs. Our system registered a temporary access override through Freight Line 3B. Edge ID matched to a worker in logistics. Name's Mitch Connor. Been with the contractor team for 3 years. Warehouse floor duty. Rachel leaned forward. Bring him in now. Before the request could be processed, a knock came from the hallway. A slim man in a wrinkled maintenance uniform stood just beyond the glass, shifting from foot to foot. That's him, the technician said. That's Mitch. Rachel opened the door. Mr. Connor, come with us, please. He followed them into the back interview room, clearly nervous. Alaska sat near the door, watching him closely. Mitch didn't look like a criminal, he looked like a man who'd seen something and didn't know what to do with it. Rachel didn't waste time. You've accessed the maintenance corridor under Concourse D. Why? I was just fixing wiring, he stammered. It's my job. That area's always been quiet. But not empty, she pressed. You saw something, didn't you? Mitch hesitated. A few weeks ago, I was down near Dock 7 where they handle overflow cargo. It's not used often. I was fixing a bracket on a pipe and I saw a kid? Rachel's spine straightened. Little boy, maybe 7 or 8, with one of the warehouse guys. But he wasn't struggling or anything. He looked calm. So I figured, I don't know, maybe it was someone's nephew. I didn't want to ask questions I couldn't answer. And you didn't report it? Rachel asked quietly. It didn't feel wrong at the time, Mitch said. But now I'm not sure. Daniels flipped open a binder with printed images. Is this the boy you saw? He asked, sliding Leo's school photo across the table. Mitch's face went white. That's him? Rachel's jaw clenched, and the man with him. Never got his name. He wore a reflective vest like the rest of us, but it was the wrong color, too dark, like one of the older uniforms. He didn't say a word. And this happened in Dock 7? Yes, ma'am. That dock hasn't been active for months, Daniel said. It's listed as undergoing structural repairs. Rachel stood, already turning toward the hallway. Then it's time we pay a visit to Dock 7. Alaska barked once, sharp and precise, already facing the exit. The route to Dock 7 was long abandoned and poorly lit, tucked behind a series of maintenance tunnels and sound-insulated storage walls that hadn't seen traffic in years. Rachel moved briskly at the front of the search team, her hand resting on the butt of her sidearm as Alaska led the way through tight corridors lined with flaking paint and rusted conduit. The air grew colder with each step they took, filled with the scent of stagnant moisture and old machinery, a stark contrast to the sterile polish of the public terminal levels above. Daniels followed close behind, clutching a portable scanner that flickered with static, indicating low signal integrity this far from the main grid. No one's cleaned here in a decade, he muttered, stepping over a fallen ceiling tile. Something's moved through here recently. Alaska's not just reacting to old scent. Rachel didn't respond. Her eyes were locked on the way Alaska paused at every third step, nose twitching, tail down, eyes fixed ahead with the focus of a predator tracking fresh prey. At the next turn, the corridor opened into a wide, rectangular loading bay with corroded shelving units along the walls and faded forklift lines painted across the cracked concrete floor. And at the far end, partially obscured behind a mesh curtain, stood a freight elevator with tarnished brass doors and a blinking floor indicator stuck on too. Alaska stopped short of the curtain and sniffed rapidly at the threshold, then let out a low, controlled bark just once. Rachel stepped around him, motioning for her flashlight. The beam swept across the floor, and that's when she saw them, a pair of small shoe prints barely visible through the thin layer of dust, leading directly to the elevator. She crouched, examining the impressions with a practiced eye. Child sighed. About 8 or 9 years old. Pattern matches Leo's sneakers from his last known footage. Next to the prints, wedged near the corner where the elevator frame met the wall, was something else. Rachel leaned closer and used tweezers to extract a single strand of fur. Short, dense and unmistakably German Shepherd. She held it up to the light. Alaska's coat. But this was shed recently. Alaska whined softly and nudged the metal frame with his snout, pawing once at the door seam. Daniels knelt beside the call panel. Power's still running. Looks like someone bypassed the standard lockout. He pulled out a diagnostic tool and connected to the access port beneath the panel. Elevator logs show last activation at 1334. Same window we lost video. Rachel glanced at her watch, which means Leo was taken down this shaft right when the cameras went dead. Daniels tapped the screen. It gets worse. The override was done using a container lift badge, not a service pass, not security clearance, just an old cargo authorization. Rachel stood abruptly. Those badges don't have terminal access. They're only supposed to work dockside. Daniels looked up at her. That's true, but this one was never disabled. It was reported lost 3 months ago. By who? A handler from External Logistics, named Ron Carver. He said he dropped it in the trash compactor, filed a report, got a replacement the next day. Rachel clenched her jaw. So the old one never got blacklisted, correct, Daniels said. And someone's been using it ever since. Rachel stepped toward the elevator and pulled the manual release key from her belt. The doors shuddered, then opened with a heavy metallic groan. Inside, the walls were lined with heavy rubber buffers, and the control panel showed signs of tampering. Daniel stepped in and lifted the inspection cover. Bypassed limiter. Someone rewired this for silent mode. No floor chimes, no movement alerts. This thing's been modified to operate under the radar. Alaska stepped inside without hesitation and sat in the corner, staring at the floor as if he already knew where they needed to go. He's focused, Rachel whispered. He smells Leo. Daniels tapped the floor selector. Level B3. That's lower than most people even know exists. Most staff don't have access down there. Except someone with that stolen badge, Rachel replied. This whole route, every step, has been rehearsed. What's on B3? Daniels asked. Emergency cold storage, decommissioned since 2015, locked from both ends. But if they've got the badge and tools, Rachel's eyes darkened. They could be using it as a pathrow, or worse, as holding space. Alaska let out another soft growl and stared at the closed elevator doors. Rachel placed a hand on his harness. Good boy, she said quietly. We'll follow your lead. As the team prepared to descend, Rachel radioed in a request for silent backup at the lower service entrance. Do not use sirens, she instructed. If someone's holding a child, we can't afford to spook them. The elevator began its descent with a low rumble, vibrations echoing up through the floor plates. The lights flickered slightly, but the descent was smooth. Daniels scanned his screen. There was no one to see besides the man in the silhouette masks. Rachel drew her weapon, flicked off the safety. Be ready. The elevator slowed as it reached the bottom. A hiss of hydraulics signaled their arrival. Alaska's muscles coiled as if bracing for the next sprint. Rachel adjusted her grip on the harness and took a breath. Open it. As the freight elevator groaned to a halt on level B3, Rachel positioned herself to the side of the doors, weapon raised, body low, her other hand on Alaska's harness. Daniels gave a nod from the opposite side, finger hovering over the manual release switch. With a sharp jerk, the doors slid open to reveal a dimly lit corridor lined with stacks of unused freight bins, metal cages, and crates marked for disposal. The air was heavy with the scent of rust and chemical coolant, remnants from when this level was still used for perishables and bioassembly cargo. Alaska stepped out first, slow and deliberate, every muscle in his frame tense as his nose swept the air like radar. Rachel moved with him, eyes scanning, finger tight on the trigger. No motion, no voices, just the hum of old refrigeration units and the faint buzz of fluorescent lights overhead. But halfway down the corridor, Alaska froze. At the far end of the hallway, a figure moved, a silhouette, lanky and hunched, disappearing quickly behind a metal cage door. Visual on one, Daniels whispered, raising his weapon. Could be staff. Not without clearance for this level, Rachel replied. Let's find out who's crashing our floor. They advanced quickly, Alaska leading the way, his low growl alerting them before they rounded the corner. Behind the cage, they found a maintenance closet with its door left ajar. Inside, scattered among broken mop handles and rusted carts, was a discarded TSA uniform jacket. On top of it, a lanyard ID badge. Faded, scratched but still readable. Damon Kellner, Daniels read aloud. Janitorial staff. Issued 2 years ago, but this series was retired last spring. Rachel grabbed the ID and flipped it. No hologram seal. It's a fake, good enough for basic scans but wouldn't pass real access. Daniels tapped into the staff database using his tablet. Hold on. This guy was terminated last year. Caught recording in a family restroom. Charges were sealed, but internal memos say he was blacklisted from all airport access. Then what the hell is he doing here now? Rachel asked grimly. Daniels turned the screen toward her. Kate Weller. Surveillance flagged his face at gate 22 yesterday. Security didn't stop him. The badge worked, which means someone let him back in and gave him tools to move freely. Rachel stepped outside, scanning the hallway. He's not just freelancing. This is organized. As they continued searching the perimeter, another officer radioed in from the personnel review desk upstairs. We've cross-referenced Kellner's old access badge with logs from the last 72 hours. It was used 10 times across 4 terminals, freight access only. No upper-level movement. Always during shift change, right when dock monitoring transitions between teams. Rachel's jaw tightened. Perfect timing to avoid overlap. He's sneaking in cargo under the guise of being trash or misplaced freight. Exactly, the voice responded. And it gets worse. We found his name linked to a flagged investigation in Denver last year. Same method. Disguised as cleaning staff, entered through logistics bay and disappeared during midday cargo transfer. Case went cold. Rachel's breath caught. Was there a missing child involved? 7-year-old boy never recovered. Police suspected inside job. Surveillance footage was wiped then too. Rachel exchanged a glance with Daniels. This isn't a random predator. He's part of something bigger. Daniels nodded. A trafficking ring, using airports as transit corridors. At that moment, Alaska stiffened and gave a sharp bark. He darted forward toward a sealed metal panel in the wall, pawing and whining. Rachel hurried to his side and saw a ventilation grate barely screwed in place. Pulling it free revealed a crawlspace, just wide enough for an adult to pass through, hunched over. Inside, a set of scuffed boot prints and dust trails led off into darkness. He's moving through service shafts, Daniels muttered, flicking on a headlamp burnt on public maps. Let's follow him, Rachel said, but carefully. They radioed for tactical backup and entered the crawlspace, Alaska weaving ahead. Every few feet they found more signs, candy wrappers, fabric scraps, and at one point a toy dinosaur half buried in grime. He's been stashing kids, Rachel said darkly, using these forgotten paths to keep them out of sight. After 20 minutes of crawling and corridor transitions, they emerged into a second freight staging bay, smaller but active. A single crate sat in the center of the floor, covered with a tarp and labeled Live Cargo Biofragile Priority Transfer. Rachel approached slowly, senses on high alert. Alaska barked and began circling the crate, tail stiff, nose pressed to the wood. Daniels checked the shipment manifest logged on the nearby console. You sender, no receiver. Just a generic code string and a fake export order. This isn't supposed to be here. Rachel ripped the tarp away and examined the crate. Padlocked but not sealed. This could have been wheeled right onto a loading belt. And once inside a cargo plane, Daniels added grimly, they'd be gone. Rachel drew a pry bar from her belt. Help me open this. The padlock snapped with a metallic clink as Rachel wrenched the crate open, heart pounding against her ribs. But inside there was no child, only foam lung panels, soft restraints embedded in the corners, and a used syringe with faint residue of what field agents instantly recognized as midazolam, a short-acting sedative often misused for incapacitation. The interior had been recently occupied. Daniels crouched and scanned for body heat, then ran a cotton swab across the cushion and held it under a chem scanner. Trace amounts of human sweat, saliva, and sedative compounds, he confirmed. Someone was inside this crate within the last 30 minutes. Rachel took a sharp breath, staring at the empty space that now felt like a vacuum. Alaska circled the perimeter, then stopped abruptly and snarled, turning his body toward the rear service gate. The sound of metal grates shifting echoed in the distance, followed by the low growl of a diesel engine igniting. They're moving him now, Rachel muttered. We're seconds late. Daniel spun toward the security panel, checking the shipment tracker. Crate ID 6073 was logged out 5 minutes ago, marked for transfer via dockside loading, truck bay 3. Rachel keyed her radio. Units, initiate lockdown of rear cargo lanes. We have a confirmed child abduction attempt. Suspect vehicle currently en route through Logistics Corridor Delta, possibly heading for intermodal highway access. Alaska gave a bark so fierce it shook the silence, then bolted toward the rear exit. Rachel followed without hesitation, sprinting after him through the narrow catwalk that overlooked the loading bays. Down below, a white utility transport truck was already backing out from Dock 3, its hazard lights flashing as a driver in a reflective vest waved off 2 handlers. Alaska charged down the stairwell like a bullet, Rachel close behind, drawing her sidearm and shouting, "Stop that truck!" But the driver didn't even glance back. Daniels shouted coordinates to Central Dispatch as he and a second officer took a side path to cut off the truck's exit. Alaska cleared the last few steps and launched into a full sprint, his legs pumping hard, tongue lolling, his body moving with trained precision and lethal speed. Rachel's lungs burned, but she kept pace. The truck turned right, barreling toward the external inspection gate, a checkpoint that, once passed, would give it access to public roads and the city's outbound cargo flow. "They're trying to vanish him into civilian traffic," Rachel growled, radioing again. "A barriers, close north exit gate, deploy stop sticks at gate 2. The truck accelerated, clearly aiming to beat the lockdown countdown. Alaska veered left, darting through the narrow path between stacked pallets and a moving forklift, leaping over a cable spool and closing in fast on the vehicle's side. Rachel saw the glint of a license plate hastily covered with a tarp and knew this had been planned to the minute. "Daniel's status?" She barked into her mic. 2 seconds to gate override. "Stop sticks are rolling into position now," he replied. The truck swerved again, pushing hard through the corner curve leading to the main exit. Alaska angled his run, closed the last 15 feet, and lunged at the passenger door. His jaws clamped onto the side mirror with trained aggression, snapping plastics, startling the driver, whose head turned just long enough for the truck to graze the safety barrier. Rachel aimed and fired a warning shot into the ground ahead of the tires. The truck jerked. Daniels appeared from the left, weapon raised. "Out of the vehicle," he shouted. "Hands up." The truck braked hard, tires screeching against asphalt as the rear doors bounced open slightly from the momentum. Rachel sprinted to the back and yanked them open fully. Inside, nestled among sealed storage bins and cooling units, was container 6073, its lid rattling, movement audible from inside. "We've got him," Rachel called, prying open the crate while Alaska barked urgently behind her. Inside lay Leo, curled in the fetal position, pale, dazed, but breathing. A nasal cannula had been used to deliver the sedative, now detached and hanging limply from his neck. Rachel checked his pulse, steady. "He's alive." Daniels called in EMT support while another officer dragged the driver, now cuffed and speechless, from the truck. His ID badge read Elias Boone, but the system flagged him immediately as a false identity linked to a trafficking alert from Phoenix 3 months prior. "Is him," Daniels confirmed. "He's been on the watch list since they lost track of him at Sky Harbor. Same MO. Fake uniform, fake badge, legitimate vehicle registration." "Which means," Rachel said coldly, "he had inside help here too." Leo stirred weakly, eyes fluttering open to Rachel's face, unfocused but searching. "Mom," he whispered. "You're safe," she told him, hand against his cheek, voice gentler than it had been all day. "We've got you, Leo." Alaska stood beside her, tail wagging for the first time, and lowered his head beside the crate, resting his chin just close enough for the boy to touch. Leo's fingers brushed against the fur, and Danielle's leaned closer. "He's dehydrated, but vitals are solid. Paramedics are 5 minutes out." Rachel stood slowly, turning toward the loading floor where secondary officers were already canvassing the route the truck had taken. "They moved fast," she muttered. "Too fast for this to be a one-man job." Danielle's nodded grimly. "There are more out there." Rachel turned toward the shadowy outlines of the cargo warehouse behind them. "Then we're not done yet." Leo's breathing was shallow but rhythmic, his eyelashes fluttering slightly as Rachel and Daniels worked quickly to stabilize him inside the crate. The small space reeked of sedatives and recycled air, but the temperature inside had been carefully regulated. This wasn't a rush job. It was planned. Rachel held Leo's head gently, tilting it back to clear his airway while Daniels checked the lining of the crate and uncovered a compact duffel bag tucked in the corner behind the padding. The bag was unzipped, revealing a meticulously packed set of children's clothes, sealed snacks, a water bottle, a plastic folder containing medical forms, and a laminated ID with Leo's photo but a false name. Rachel stared at the forged identity card, fingers tightening around it. They were going to ship him out under an alias, she muttered. This isn't just abduction, it's relocation. Full extraction protocol. They had a route planned. Daniels looked over her shoulder, brows furrowing. This paperwork's in Spanish and French. Dual adjutant documents. Emergency contact listed in Colombia. Probably a front. Rachel nodded grimly. They weren't keeping him here. He was meant to vanish permanently. Crossbed. Off-grid. Probably within the hour. Alaska sat near the base of the crate, eyes trained on Leo, who began to stir, fingers twitching against the foam. Rachel leaned closer. Leo, can you hear me? You're safe now. The boy's eyelids flicked open, unfocused and dazed, pupils dilated but reactive. He blinked several times, lips parting slowly. Mom? No, sweetheart, Rachel said gently. I'm Officer Rachel, your mom's on the way. She turned to Daniels. Call her. Now. Outside the truck, the scene had shifted from chaos to tightly coordinated response. Emergency medics rushed toward the vehicle, clearing space as Rachel carried Leo in her arms, his head resting against her shoulder. He weighed almost nothing, his body limp from the lingering effects of the gas. But he wasn't in pain. Just disoriented, the MT team gently transferred him to a stretcher, placed an oxygen mask over his face, and began administering fluids intravenously. BP is stable, one medic said. He's coming around. Sedative is still in his system, another noted. But there's no sign of trauma, no bruises, no physical harm. Rachel exhaled slowly. They needed him healthy. Cargo value drops if the package is damaged. Daniels turned toward the forensic team that had arrived on site, already dusting the crate for prints, bags filled with pre-cleared customs documentation. These people were ready to bypass airport scans, shipping him as a live specimen. Biofragile shipment under priority diplomatic cover, one agent confirmed. Interpol's been tracking these methods for years. It's all black market logistics. Rachel knelt beside the stretcher, resting her hand lightly on Leo's shoulder. Do you know who took you, Leo? The boy's eyes fluttered open again, and he turned his head slightly. There was a man. He wore a jacket like the others, he said. Do you remember what he looked like? Leo blinked, struggling to form a picture. He had something on his face, like a band-aid. A scar? Rachel asked. Leo nodded weakly. He didn't talk much, just said we were going to see someone in a warehouse. Then everything smelt funny, then I slept. Rachel looked up as Daniels reappeared with a hard drive in hand. We pulled back data from the crate's GPS tracker. It had a false signal looped into the airport's manifest system, completely invisible to the central database. They ran a shadow route, Rachel said, masking container movement so it wouldn't flag any location anomalies. And here's the worst part, Daniels continued, showing her the screen. According to this manifest, Crate 6073 was scheduled to be loaded onto flight VZ-118 to Bogota in 47 minutes. Rachel's heart clenched. So if we'd been even an hour later, he'd be in international airspace right now, Daniels finished. And we'd be chasing ghosts. The Alaska sat quietly beside the stretcher, watching Leo with eyes that never blinked. The boy stirred and reached toward the dog's neck, fingers wrapping weakly around the edge of his harness. He found the Yatimer's chief user for language he'd never thought possible. He gave up. Across the tarmac, officers led the truck driver into a mobile interrogation tent, where agents from Homeland Security had already begun cross-referencing his identity and past movements. His fake alias connects to 3 prior smuggling operations, an agent briefed Rachel. We've got digital trails pointing to a broader network. South Florida, Southern California, potentially Mexico City. Rachel stared at the open crate, eyes narrowing. They've used this method before. There are more kids and more containers. Daniels joined her. We've already locked down all outbound shipments and freight manifests. Cross-checking every crate logged in the last 72 hours, we'll find the rest. The handlers, the ones behind this, whoever authorized the badge access, whoever disabled the cameras, they're still in this building. and they know we're closing in. Alaska stood suddenly, ears twitching toward the far end of the hangar where two figures in reflective gear slipped quietly behind a maintenance stairwell. Rachel's gaze snapped to them. "We've got movement at southeast stair access. 2 individuals in unauthorized gear." "Let's move," Daniels said, drawing his weapon. Rachel gave a lunged forward like a bolt of instinct and fury, and the chase began. Alaska sprinted through the steel maze of the hangar, Paws pounding against the concrete as his body weaved between cargo pallets and forklift lanes, the scent of deception burning like fire in his lungs. Rachel and Daniels followed closely, weapons drawn, voices tight with urgency as they shouted for staff to stand back. Ahead, the 2 figures in reflective vests moved with speed that betrayed experience, not panic. They weren't running blindly, they knew the layout. They ducked under scaffolding, pushed through a mesh barrier, and vanished behind a rolling shutter used for freight segregation. "Seal the east wing," Rachel barked into her comm. "These 2 aren't runners, they're part of the operation." Alaska skidded to a halt at the shutter, barking violently, tail straight, hackles raised. Daniels caught up, pried the lock with a tactical bar, and kicked the panel open. Inside was a dim storage zone, half empty, dimly lit by flickering fluorescence and the buzz of an old HCAP system. Alaska darted in and turned left. Rachel followed and found them. 2 men crouched beside an open locker, one clutching a burner phone, the other halfway into changing his vest. "Hands where I can see them," she shouted. They froze. Within 10 minutes, the 2 men, Michael Torres and Kevin Dre, were cuffed and seated inside the mobile debrief unit parked near the logistics control station. Their profiles popped quickly. Both mid-level logistics employees, both cleared for container management, both with irregular activity logs flagged during Daniel's cross-check of the prior 72 hours. Rachel paced outside the trailer while Daniels debriefed with a Homeland agent. "You were letting containers bypass secondary scanning," he explained. "Claimed they thought it was harmless, just customs favors, until they realized what was actually inside." "Why'd they do it?" "Money," Daniels replied. "Both were swimming in personal debt. Dre's house is in foreclosure. Torres has 2 payday loans in collections. Then someone from a client in Colombia offered a cash bonus for looking the other way, no questions asked. They didn't report. They didn't want to lose their jobs. Or their bribes." Rachel clenched her jaw. "They didn't just enable this, they made it possible." Inside the trailer, Torres sat trembling, eyes darting between the officers as he repeated the same statement. "I never touched the kid, I swear. I didn't even know there was a child until they sent that crate marked biofragile and told me not to ask questions. I just logged it through." "You got paid," Rachel said. "You knew something was off." "I needed it," he whispered. "I thought it was just high-value shipments." "You never checked," Rachel snapped. "Because you didn't care." Dre was less talkative, staring blankly at the wall as his lawyer leaned into his ear. But the moment he heard Rachel mention Leo's name, something shifted in his expression. "That crate was supposed to be gone before inspection even started," he muttered. "Wasn't supposed to stay overnight. There was a window, 36 minutes between security overlap. The guy who planned it said it'd be clean, like clockwork." "What guy?" Daniels pressed. "Did he work here?" "He didn't use his name," Dre admitted. "But he wore a contractor badge, older, maybe late 40s. Had a burn scar on his neck, South American accent. He knew everyone's schedule." Rachel exchanged a look with Daniels. "He fits the description Leo gave. He's real," Daniels nodded slowly, "and he's organized." At headquarters, the information began sinking across federal channels. 2 more cases surfaced, one from Dallas-Fort Worth, another from Newark. Both involved children under 10, reported missing inside airport terminals under unexplained circumstances. In both cases, surveillance gaps matched shift changeovers. Both terminals had used the same contractor logistics firm for outsourced container routing. Rachel leaned over the data screen, scanning the patterns. "It's not coincidence," she said. "This is a pipeline. These kids weren't just stolen. They were processed, documented, and repackaged like cargo. And it's been happening for months." Homeland Security formally elevated the case to a multi-agency task force within hours. Rachel's command post became the ground zero for Operation Silent Gate, a new interagency effort to uncover the broader trafficking network exploiting international air corridors. A full sweep of Westgate's vendor access logs commenced, every badge re-verified, every shift cross-checked, every locked storage unit opened. Meanwhile, Leo remained in stable condition at the airport medical bay, watched over by 2 officers and, as always, by Alaska, who refused to leave his side. Rachel stopped by between meetings, crouching beside the boy's bed. "You're a strong one," she said softly. Leo smiled faintly. "He found me. We all did," she replied, scratching behind Alaska's ear. "But he led us." Back in the war room, Daniels was on a call with a field agent in Houston, who had just discovered a nearly identical crate, empty but bearing the same interior setup, scent traces, and falsified airway bill. "They're not just using this terminal," Daniels said. "They're rotating operations across the country. Always the same setup, same timing, same method." Rachel pointed to the wall map now filled with red pins and photos of missing children. "And always the same failure point. Internal access, inside help, people who sell out their badges for cash." She turned toward the window and watched as an unmarked black SUV rolled up to the hangar. The woman who stepped out wore an FBI badge and the expression of someone who already knew how deep the rabbit hole went. "I'm Special Agent Nadine Keller," she said. "We're expanding your findings into a federal investigation. Effective immediately, you're being folded into a joint operations unit. Your lead, Rachel." "Where do we start?" Rachel asked. Keller replied simply, "We find the buyer, we follow the route, and we shut them down." 2 weeks after the raid at Westgate International, the morning sun rose slow and solemn over the city skyline, casting a warm amber glow over the federal complex where members of law enforcement, aviation security, and rescue teams had gathered. The event was not broadcasted to the public. There were no media vans or press conferences, no cameras flashing. This was not a celebration for headlines. It was a ceremony for those who had walked through fire and brought something irreplaceable back. Inside the command hall, rows of folding chairs faced a low stage where a modest podium stood flanked by national and state flags. At the center of it all, wearing his harness freshly brushed, the name Alaska, embroidered boldly in navy blue, sat the German shepherd whose instincts had cracked a national trafficking ring. Alaska didn't understand applause, nor did he crave it, but he did understand Rachel's voice, steady and proud, as she took the stage with the citation scroll in her hand. "Most of our K9s are trained to follow orders," Rachel said, addressing the room of agents, handlers, and first responders. "But sometimes the greatest service they can give is when they break from those orders for the right reasons." On April 11th, Alaska did just that. She paused, glancing down at the dog, who sat poised beside her, ears forward, eyes calm. Instead of following his assigned path during routine explosive detection patrol, he picked up something we didn't, and he didn't let it go. That deviation led us to uncover the illegal entry point used to smuggle a missing child. And that child is now safe, alive, and healing because of one dog's refusal to ignore his instincts. The applause that followed wasn't thunderous. It was steady, heartfelt, deeply human. Daniel stepped forward, carrying a new collar tag, engraved with the words, "K9 Alaska Honor Without Command." As Rachel knelt to secure it to Alaska's harness, the dog lifted his head slightly and nuzzled her neck, just once. The moment passed quickly, but it was enough. Nearby, the director of K9 Federal Training stood with 2 of her regional officers scribbling note. "His behavior wasn't insubordination," she said under her breath. "It was intuition refined through trauma-informed exposure. We need to start building that into the national curriculum. Dogs like him don't need stricter obedience. They need permission to trust their senses." In the days that followed, adjustments began nationwide. A new training module titled Instinct-Driven Divergence Response was approved by the Department of Homeland Security, emphasizing the importance of interpreting body language deviations in high-risk patrol scenarios. Rachel was asked to co-author the internal white paper. She declined the spotlight but agreed to record a voiceover for the officer training archive. "Sometimes the dog sees what we can't," she said simply. "And when they act, it's our job to follow." Meanwhile, at Westgate Pediatric Recovery Unit, Leo Flores sat upright in bed, a sketchpad in his lap, and a half-finished drawing of a black and tan dog taking shape under his pencil. The physical side effects of the abduction had faded quickly. No injury, no lingering illness. But the emotional fog had taken more time, now with his mom seated beside him, fingers braided into his hair. Leo smiled for the first time in days. "Can I ask something?" he said quietly. "Of course," she replied. He looked up at her, eyes steady. "Where's Alaska?" She blinked, then laughed, a laugh filled with relief. "You want to see him?" He nodded fiercely. "He found me. I remember, I couldn't see anything, I was so scared. But I smelled him, his fur. And then I felt safe. Her fur is Felltown. Would you like to thank him yourself?" 2 days later, Rachel arrived at the hospital with Alaska walking calmly at her side. The staff had cleared a quiet space in the courtyard, cordoned off from patients and visitors. Leo was waiting, standing now, legs slightly shaky but filled with determination. When Alaska saw him, the dog tilted his head once, then trotted forward. No leash needed. Leo opened his arms, and Alaska leaned in, pressing his full weight into the boy's chest, tail sweeping slowly across the grass. No one said anything. No one needed to. Later that evening, Leo handed Rachel the drawing. "For him," he said. "So he remembers me." The sketch showed Alaska standing in front of a crate, his head turned slightly back as if watching for someone behind him. Above the scene, Leo had written one line in blocky, uneven handwriting. "You didn't leave me in the dark." 3 months later, the air at Westgate Terminal was quieter than usual. Not because of a delay or technical issue, but because the usual rhythms of travel had given way to something less mechanical and far more human. A small ceremony was being held just beyond the security checkpoint at Gate C7, inside a cordoned-off section reserved not for VIPs or diplomats, but for a hero with 4 legs and a quiet heart. Alaska sat patiently in the middle of the cleared floor, his coat glistening under the soft terminal lights, a polished canine medal affixed to his vest. Around him stood members of the TSA, airport police, federal agents, and a handful of civilians, among them the Flores family, front and center. Rachel approached the podium dressed in plain clothes now, her badge clipped loosely to her belt, eyes filled with more pride than she cared to hide. 5 years ago, Alaska entered service with the TSA's explosive detection unit. She began, her voice clear and steady. In that time, he completed over 400 successful operations, participated in 15 federal investigations, and most recently, became the first canine in agency history to initiate a deviation protocol that led directly to the recovery of a missing child and the takedown of an international trafficking network. The crowd stood respectfully silent, and even the most seasoned officers held still as Rachel continued. "Today we honor not just his service, but the next chapter of his life. It is with gratitude and full distinction that Alaska is being granted early retirement and permanent adoption by the Flores family." A quiet ripple of warmth moved through the gathering as Alaska turned his head toward Leo, who stood only a few steps away holding a leash in both hands, his eyes wide with reverence and something deeper. Rachel knelt beside Alaska, unbuckled the tactical vest slowly, and slid it off his body with gentle care. In its place, she slipped on a simple blue collar embroidered with Leo's name and a silver tag that read "Family, Not Duty." The old canine straightened once, then immediately padded forward to Leo, who dropped to his knees and threw his arms around the dog's neck. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Cameras flashed quietly in the background, not for news but for memory, as Leo buried his face into Alaska's shoulder. His mother watched with tears glistening in her eyes, one hand covering her mouth, the other wrapped tightly around her own heart. The chaplain, who often led airport memorials, stepped forward, offered a few closing words about loyalty and courage, and then invited Leo to speak. The boy hesitated, glanced at his mom, then stood, his hand never leaving Alaska's back. He looked down for a moment, then lifted his chin and said clearly, "I used to be scared of the airport. I thought it was a place where people disappeared." His voice didn't shake. "I'm not afraid of the airport anymore," he turned and said to his mom, pausing just long enough for her to start crying, "because that's where someone chose not to leave me behind." He looked down at Alaska and smiled. He stayed. Rachel stepped away from the podium as applause filled the gate area. Not loud, not forced, just steady, real, the kind that isn't given to medals or protocol but to truth, and to love in its simplest, most unspoken form. As the ceremony ended, Leo led Alaska through the terminal like any other passenger, their steps light, their bond heavy with meaning. They passed the check-in counter where the ordeal had begun months ago, past the vending machines and the polished floors that once echoed with panic, past the wall where Alaska had barked without warning, and now, for the first time, Leo didn't look over his shoulder. He looked ahead. That evening, back at the Flores home, Alaska lay stretched out on a thick new rug, his head resting beside Leo's sock-covered feet while the boy sketched quietly on the floor. The drawing was of an airport terminal, but this time it wasn't cold or empty. It was warm, glowing, full of people. At the center, a boy and a dog stood side by side, facing the arrivals gate. On the bottom, Leo printed the caption carefully, "We don't get lost, we get found." The room was silent except for the scratch of pencil on paper and the soft rhythm of Alaska's breathing, now finally, peacefully at rest. If this story moved you, consider liking and subscribing so we can bring you more true, emotional stories like this one. What part of Leo and Alaska's journey stayed with you the most? And just out of curiosity, where in the world are you watching from? Drop a comment below, we'd love